The villagers of Harrow's Hollow had a way of talking that could bruise a soul. Their words were sharp as thorns, and for Lila, everyone had left a mark. She had grown up hearing that she was too fat to dance, too ugly to wed, too clumsy to be seen. As a child, she had tried to ignore the laughter when she tripped in the square, or when her dress tore because she'd grown out of it again. But words once planted grow in the dark parts of the heart. By the time she was 16, Lila stopped going to dances. By 18, she stopped looking people in the eye. And by 20, she covered herself completely, a sack stitched from burlap grain cloth with only 2 rough holes for her eyes. It wasn't fashion. It was armor. She said it was to keep out the dust, but everyone knew it was to keep out their stares. The townsfolk had given her a name, the Sack Woman of Harrow's Hollow. The name clung to her like smoke. Children whispered it and dared each other to peek through her barn window at night. The women shook their heads in pity. The men laughed behind her back. And Lila learned to move through the world quietly, hoping that if she made herself small enough, invisible enough, the cruelty would pass her by. She lived alone at the edge of the village, in a leaning wooden barn that once belonged to her father, a kind but broken man who had died too young, leaving her nothing but debts and silence. She worked as a cleaner in the mill, her burlap sack dark with flour dust by day. But when the sun went down and the mill was quiet, the barn became her secret stage. There, under the moonlight spilling through the cracks in the roof, Lila danced. She would close her eyes and let the world fall away. Her body, heavy and ungraceful in daylight, felt light in the shadows. Each movement was clumsy, yet full of aching sincerity. Arms reaching, feet stumbling, heart pouring out the pain she could never speak. The rough fabric of her sack scratched her skin, but she didn't care. When she danced, no one could see her. No one could laugh. She remembered the first time she'd danced, back when her mother was alive. Her mother's laughter had been warm, like music. "Dance, Lila," she had said, holding her little hands and spinning her in the kitchen. "Dance so the world can't catch you." But her mother had died when Lila was 12, and the music went with her. All that remained were memories, and a yearning to feel that freedom again, even if only in secret. Sometimes when she finished dancing, Lila would sit by the small mirror in her barn and trace her face beneath the sack. She'd wonder if her mother would still recognize her. Her cheeks were fuller now, her skin rough from work, her hair tangled and uneven where she'd cut it herself. She told herself it didn't matter. Beauty was a luxury for other girls, the ones who twirled in silk at the harvest festival while men watched with admiration. For Lila, survival was enough. Yet deep down there was a quiet ache, not for beauty but for kindness. She longed, not to be adored, not to be envied, but simply to be seen without disgust. To have someone look at her and not flinch. On nights when the wind carried laughter from the village, Lila would press her ear against the barn door and listen. She imagined what it might feel like to dance where others could see her, to be part of something instead of a shadow outside it. Then the laughter would fade, and the ache in her chest would return. She would pull the sack tighter around her shoulders, whisper to herself, "It's better this way," and begin to dance again, alone, unseen and unashamed in the quiet company of her dreams. Every autumn, when the first golden leaves began to fall over Harrow's Hollow, the villagers prepared for the grandest event of the year, the Festival of Dancers. It was the one night when music, color, and laughter swept through the square like a fever. Girls in bright skirts and ribbons practiced for weeks, hoping to catch the eye of a man who might take their hand when the music began, and maybe keep holding it long after the music ended. To the people of the Hollow, the festival wasn't just a dance. It was a chance at destiny. Many a marriage had begun under those paper lanterns strung across the square. Every girl dreamed of being chosen to dance beside the festival's guest musician, for it was said that the musician's partner would be blessed with luck and love for the rest of her life. This year, word spread quickly. The guest musician was Elior, a wandering violinist with a reputation as strange as it was beautiful. He'd been traveling through villages and border towns, leaving behind whispers of songs that made grown men weep and children dream of stars. Some said his music could heal broken hearts. Others said he played for souls who'd forgotten how to feel. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. This year's festival would be unlike any other, for everyone except Lila. From her small window on the edge of town, she could see the distant glow of lanterns being hung across the square. The laughter drifted to her barn like a bittersweet melody. Women were trying on dresses, men were polishing boots, and even the children were humming the opening tune of the harvest dance. Lila watched for a moment, then turned away. The sight stirred something deep and painful in her chest. She remembered when she used to love the festival. As a child, she'd hide behind her mother's skirts, watching the dancers spin in circles like petals caught in the wind. Her mother used to hum along, holding her hand and whispering, "One day you'll dance there too, my little star." But that was a lifetime ago. Now when she thought of the festival, she didn't feel excitement, only fear. The thought of standing under those lights, surrounded by watchful eyes and cruel whispers, made her heart tighten. She'd become the village's ghost, a shadow people pointed at but never invited. Still, she couldn't stop listening. Each evening, after her work at the mill, she'd walk through the outskirts of the square, never close enough to be seen, but near enough to hear the music from the rehearsals. The sound of fiddles and tambourines stirred something she didn't want to name. Her feet itched to move. Her body remembered rhythm even when her mind tried to forget. Then one evening, as she lingered by the edge of the road, she heard it. A violin unlike any she'd heard before. The notes were low and mournful, weaving through the air like a sigh. It wasn't the joyful, polished sound of the festival musicians. It was something older, lonelier. It felt as if someone was speaking her language, the language of those who had known pain and turned it into music. She froze. The tune made her chest ache. Through the dim glow of lanterns, she saw him, Elior, the traveling violinist. He stood near the well, eyes closed, bow gliding like silk over the strings. His face was calm but full of feeling. The villagers clapped and cheered, yet he looked almost sad, as if hearing something no one else could. Lila lingered in the shadows long after the crowd dispersed, the sound of his violin still echoing in her mind. For the first time in years, she felt something stir beneath her fear, a longing not just to listen but to answer. That night, back in her barn, she couldn't sleep. The music haunted her. When she finally rose, the moonlight spilling through the roof, she began to dance again. Her movements were slower, deeper, guided not by memory this time, but by the echo of a violin. And though she didn't know it yet, someone else would soon hear that echo too. The night after the festival rehearsal, the village lay silent under a silver moon. The laughter, the gossip, the clatter of hooves all had gone to sleep. Only one sound stirred the darkness. The faint creak of an old barn door opening at the edge of Harrow's Hollow. Inside, Lila stood barefoot on the wooden floor, the cool air brushing against her skin through the holes in her burlap sack. A single lantern hung from a beam above her, its weak light flickering like a heartbeat. She could still hear that violin from the night before. The melody had carved itself into her memory. The notes had felt alive, full of grief and beauty, as though they were speaking directly to her. She had not been able to let it go, so she began to dance. Her feet were unsure at first, her body heavy from work and weariness. But as she moved, the rhythm came back to her, the rhythm she'd hidden from the world for years. Her arms stretched wide, her body swayed and spun in awkward circles. She closed her eyes and imagined she was light instead of shadow, wind instead of weight. Each movement was a prayer she didn't know she was saying. Then, faintly, she heard it. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a soft, echoing note, rising and falling like a sigh. But then came another, and another. It was a violin. Lila froze, her heart slamming in her chest. The sound drifted through the cracks in the barn wall, slow and gentle, following the rhythm of her steps. Whoever was playing wasn't mocking her, they were accompanying her. Her breath caught. She turned toward the door, her bare feet silent on the wood. Through a thin slit in the boards, she saw a figure standing in the moonlight. A tall man, his violin resting on his shoulder, bow gliding softly across the strings. It was Elior. He didn't look at her with the mocking curiosity she'd known all her life. His eyes were closed, as if he were listening more than watching. The melody he played seemed to mirror her, every hesitant movement, every burst of feeling, every broken rhythm. It was as though he understood her dance without needing to see her face. For the first time in years, Lila didn't stop. She let the music carry her, forgetting the sack, forgetting her fear. Her hands lifted, her feet spun across the floor. The violin followed her every motion, its notes rising and falling like a heartbeat beside hers. The two sounds, her movements and his song, wove together, fragile yet whole, like two souls whispering to one another in secret. When the final note faded into the night, silence filled the barn again. Lila stood still, trembling. Slowly, she stepped toward the crack in the wall, but Elior was gone. Only the echo of his melody remained, soft as a promise. She pressed her hands to her chest. No one had ever played for her before. No one had ever stayed to listen. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake in the straw, staring at the moon through the cracks above her, replaying the moment again and again. She didn't know why he'd stopped to play with her. Maybe he'd been curious, maybe just kind, but a dangerous thought crept into her mind, a thought she hadn't dared feel in years. What if he hadn't been mocking her? The next day, when she went to the mill, whispers filled the air. The women were already talking about the handsome musician who'd arrived, how gentle he seemed, how he refused to play in taverns but preferred quiet places near the woods. One of them mentioned seeing him walking near the edge of the village late last night. Lila's heart skipped. She worked silently, head down, but inside, her thoughts were spinning. The sound of his violin had awakened something in her, something fragile and bright. For the first time in years, she began to wonder if there were things in her life she hadn't lost after all. The next morning, the whole village of Harrow's Hollow buzzed with talk of the traveling violinist. Elior, the man with the sad smile and silver strings, had become the subject of every whispered conversation and admiring glance. Women brought baskets of fruit to his inn, pretending it was generosity but hoping for his attention. The men respected him, though some envied the quiet way he seemed to command every eye in the room. Everyone had heard him play at the square the night before, but only Lila knew there was another performance after that. Only she had felt his music follow her into the dark. She told no one. Not that anyone would believe her. That same afternoon, Elior returned to the marketplace, his violin slung over his back. A small crowd gathered, hoping he'd play again. He smiled politely and spoke little, his voice soft but steady. Someone asked him where he'd learned to play like that. He only said, "From listening to the lonely places." But when a farmer's wife asked him if he'd met anyone interesting in Harrow's Hollow, Elior hesitated. He thought of the barn, the faint sound of footsteps on old wood, the mysterious dancer in the sack. Her movements had been awkward, yes, but filled with something he rarely saw in people anymore. Honesty. She danced, he murmured aloud, almost to himself. Not like the others. She danced as if her heart had forgotten it was broken. The crowd fell quiet for a moment. Then from behind him came a sharp laugh. It was Mira, the baker's daughter, the prettiest girl in the village and the self-proclaimed festival queen. She placed her hand on her hip, her voice dripping with amusement. "Oh, the sack woman, you mean? You poor traveler, you've been bewitched." A ripple of laughter spread through the onlookers. Someone muttered, "He must have seen her creeping around the fields." Another added, "Maybe he mistook her for a ghost." Elior turned, confusion flickering across his face. "Sack woman?" Mira grinned, enjoying the attention. "You'll see her eventually. She hides under a burlap sack because she's too ugly to be seen. People say she frightens the crows away without even trying." The laughter grew louder. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. "You'd best be careful, musician. If she danced for you, she might think you're in love." Elior didn't laugh. His brow furrowed as he looked over the crowd, noticing how easily cruelty had become entertainment. "You mock her because she hides," he said quietly. "But maybe she hides because you mock her." The laughter faded, uncomfortable now. Mira's smile faltered. But then, trying to regain her charm, she flipped her hair and said with a smirk, "Tell you what, traveler, if you think she's so special, why don't you bring her to the Harvest Festival? Let's see this mystery dancer of yours perform in the light. I'll bet you'll change your tune the moment you see her face." The men laughed again, this time more cautiously. Someone shouted, "Yes, bring her out. Let's see if she's real." Elior's eyes glinted with quiet defiance. "A bet, then," he said, his tone still calm but edged with purpose. Mira crossed her arms. "If you bring her to the festival and still think she's beautiful, I'll admit I was wrong." "And if I don't?" he asked. "Then you play a song for me," she said sweetly, "in front of everyone." The crowd erupted with laughter and cheers. Elior smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant, as though already hearing another melody, one that didn't belong to Mira's vanity or the crowd's cruelty. Then it's settled, he said. I'll find her, and I'll bring her to dance. Later that evening, when the square emptied, Elior walked the same dirt road that led toward the outskirts of the village. The moon was rising, pale and watchful. He stopped near a broken fence and listened for that rhythm he'd heard before, the sound of hesitant footsteps moving like whispers in the dark. Somewhere beyond the fields, in a quiet barn filled with shadows, Lila felt her heart beat faster for reasons she didn't yet understand. The music, it seemed, was coming back for her. For 3 nights, Elior searched the outskirts of Harrow's Hollow, following faint traces of music and movement. He asked no one for help. He didn't trust their mockery or their pity. He only trusted the sound he remembered, the rhythm of a woman who danced not for applause but for survival. On the 4th night, he found her. The moon was full and white as bone. From the distance, he saw the glow of a single lantern flickering inside a lonely barn. He approached quietly, the tall grass whispering around his boots. Through the gaps in the wooden wall, he saw her, Lila, moving in slow circles. The burlap sack clung to her form, but even beneath it, he could feel the raw emotion in her movements. Each turn, each stumble, each lifted arm seemed to tell a story he didn't need words for. He didn't raise his violin this time. He simply watched. But Lila stopped mid-spin, sensing she wasn't alone. Her breath hitched. The barn fell silent except for the creak of old wood. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. Elior stepped into the doorway, the moonlight framing him. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "It's only me." Her hands flew to the sack, gripping it tightly around her shoulders. "Go away, you shouldn't see me." "I've already seen you," he said gently. "You dance like the world forgot how to be cruel." She turned away. "You don't know what you're saying." He took a few steps closer, slow and careful. "I do. The others may not understand what they saw, but I do. You hide because they made you believe you should." Her chest rose and fell quickly. "You don't know me," she whispered. "No," he admitted. "But I'd like to." She shook her head. "You'll regret that." Elior's eyes softened. "I doubt it." For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the broken musician and the hidden dancer, both marked by loneliness in different ways. Then, without thinking, Elior lifted his violin. "Let me play for you again," he said. "No one will see. Only the moon." Something in his tone disarmed her. Hesitantly, Lila nodded. The bow touched the strings and a gentle melody rose, tender and searching. The music filled the barn, curling around her like mist. Her fear wavered. Slowly, she began to move again, awkwardly at first, then freely. Her steps found rhythm in his song. Her arms opened. Her body spoke what her lips could not. And then, mid-dance, Elior did something she never expected. He stepped forward. Lila froze. He was only a few feet away now. The music faltered to a soft hum. Her breath trembled as she felt his hand rise toward her face. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." But his touch was gentle, not forceful, not mocking. His fingers brushed the edge of the burlap. "You don't have to hide from me." Her knees weakened. The urge to run warred with the desperate need to be seen. Just once, without laughter. And then, with a quiet breath, he pulled the sack away. The coarse fabric fell to the floor. Moonlight touched her face, the face she had hidden for years. Her cheeks were flushed from dancing, her lips dry and trembling, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. She wasn't beautiful by the village's cruel standards. Her features were plain, her skin roughened from work, her hair uneven where she'd cut it herself. But in that moment there was something radiant in her expression, raw, honest humanity that no beauty could counterfeit. Elior didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He simply watched her as though she were something precious he'd been searching for without knowing it. "Now I see you," he said softly. "And you're still dancing." Lila's throat tightened. She turned her face away, but tears fell before she could stop them. He lifted her chin gently. "Let them say what they will," he whispered. "They see what they want to see." "But his voice broke for a moment. "I see you." For the first time in her life, Lila didn't pull the sack back over her head. Outside, the wind stirred and the barn door creaked open, revealing faint figures lurking in the distance, villagers who had followed Elior, eager to see the spectacle. Their gasps filled the night, but neither Lila nor Elior moved. The secret was out. The world had seen her, and for once she didn't run. For a long, fragile moment, no one moved. The night air in Harrow's Hollow hung heavy, filled with the quiet echo of gasps and whispers. The villagers, those same people who had laughed and bet and mocked, stood at the barn door, torches flickering in their hands, eyes wide with cruel delight. They had come hoping for a joke. What they found instead was Lila, her sack on the ground, her face bare in the silver light. The silence was a strange kind, half shock, half hunger. Someone snickered softly, the sound slicing through the stillness. Then came a woman's voice, Mira's, sharp and mocking as ever. "So this is your mystery dancer, Iliar?" she said, stepping forward. The famous sack woman herself. "You said she was beautiful. Does your music make you blind as well as foolish?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lila flinched. Every cruel word she had ever heard returned in that instant, crashing through her chest like stones. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than the mocking voices, louder than the whispers. She wanted to run, to hide, to grab the sack and disappear into darkness again. But before she could move, Iliar stepped between her and the crowd. "Enough," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The laughter died. Even Mira's smirk faltered. "You came here to see a monster," Iliar continued, turning to face them. "You came to laugh at her. But tell me, how many of you could dance if every step cost you your dignity? How many of you could face the world after it told you every day that you were unworthy of being seen?" The crowd shifted uneasily. His words fell heavy, uncomfortably honest. "She dances," he said. "Not for applause, not for you. She dances because her heart refuses to die, and that makes her more beautiful than anyone here." Then, without waiting for permission, he lifted his violin again. The bow touched the strings, and the first note rang out like a heartbeat. It wasn't a song of celebration or victory. It was low and mournful, trembling with emotion. The melody rose and fell like breath, soft, uncertain, alive. It was the kind of song that stripped away pride and left only truth behind. Lila stood frozen for a moment. The sound filled her ears, her chest, her soul. Her fear began to loosen its grip. Slowly, hesitantly, she moved one step, then another. Her bare feet brushed against the dusty barn floor. The same barn that had once been her hiding place now became her stage. She danced, not gracefully, not perfectly, but with something real, something that came from a place deeper than shame. Her hands trembled, her hair fell loose around her face, and tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. Every step said what her voice could not: "I am still here. I am still alive." Iliar's music followed her, guiding her like a thread through the storm. The villagers watched in stunned silence. Some lowered their eyes. Others blinked as if seeing her for the first time. The mockery faded, replaced by something unfamiliar. Respect, maybe even awe. The final note of the violin lingered in the air like a sigh. Lila's movement slowed until she stopped, standing in the middle of the barn, her chest heaving, her eyes wet but defiant. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the open door. Iliar lowered his violin and looked at her, his expression full of quiet pride. "Now they've seen you," he said softly. "And they'll never forget." Lila swallowed hard, her voice a whisper. "They'll still laugh. Let them," he said. "Their laughter can't touch what you've shown tonight." And then, to the shock of everyone present, he turned to the crowd and bowed. To her. "Tonight," he said, "the harvest festival begins early, and its first dance belongs to her." No one dared laugh. No one dared speak. As the villagers slowly drifted away one by one, Lila stood trembling in the moonlight, unsure whether to cry or smile. Iliar stayed beside her, silent but steady, as if guarding something sacred. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, she felt seen. The morning after the unmasking, Harrow's Hollow woke in uneasy silence. The gossip that once flitted through the streets like sparrows now hung heavier, slower, unsure. No one could stop talking about what they'd seen in the barn. Some said Iliar had bewitched them all with his music. Others whispered that Lila had done it herself, somehow transforming from a pitiful creature into something almost radiant. No one could explain what they'd felt watching her dance, why their laughter had turned to silence, why their scorn had burned into shame. By noon, the story had reached every ear. By evening, it had twisted into something even stranger. Some said the sack woman had trapped the violinist with her witchcraft. Others said he'd pitied her so much he'd lost his senses. But one thing was certain: The village would be watching when the harvest festival began. That night, as the square filled with music and light, Lila stayed inside her barn, far from the lanterns. She'd taken off the sack for good, but she couldn't yet face the world. Her heart still trembled at the memory of their eyes, their laughter, their disbelief. Then came a soft knock on her door. She froze. The voice that followed was calm, gentle. "Lila, it's me." She hesitated only a moment before unlatching the door. Elior stood there in the lantern glow, his violin slung across his back, his expression tender. "You weren't at the festival," he said. "I thought you might still be dancing in here." Lila lowered her gaze. "I can't go," she murmured. "Not after last night. They'll be waiting to laugh again." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Let them wait," he said softly. "Let them see what they missed." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly and took a folded cloth from his satchel. "This was meant for my partner tonight." He unfolded it, a simple white shawl embroidered with silver thread. Every year the musician chooses one woman to dance beside him at the harvest festival. It's a tradition I never cared for. Until now. Lila shook her head, taking a step back. "No, Elior, you can't. They'll talk?" He finished gently. "They've already talked enough?" He moved closer. "You faced them once, Lila. You can face them again. But not alone." Her throat tightened. "Why me?" she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because when you dance, I remember what it means to be alive." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't mean that," he smiled, small, sad, and utterly sincere. "I do." Before she could protest, he extended his hand. "Come with me." For a heartbeat, she stared at it. The same hand that had lifted the sack from her face, the same hand that had shielded her from the crowd. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. And together, they walked toward the village square. The music faded as they entered. Every head turned. The laughter that had been ready on every tongue fell away in stunned silence. Lila's heart pounded so hard she thought she might collapse. But Elior didn't let go. He led her to the center of the square where the lanterns hung like golden stars. Then, without a word, he raised his violin and began to play. The melody was soft at first, gentle like the night breeze. Lila moved, uncertain but determined, her steps guided by the music and his steady gaze. The villagers watched, speechless, as she spun beneath the lights. No sack, no shame, only strength. When the final note faded, Elior lowered his violin. The silence that followed was deeper than applause could ever be. Then he turned to her, knelt on one knee, and took her hand again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Lila," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "The world may never understand what beauty truly is. But I do. You've shown me." He smiled softly. "You are the song I've been searching for. Will you let me walk beside it for the rest of my life?" Lila stared at him, tears streaming freely now. The crowd seemed to disappear. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel ashamed. She nodded, unable to speak. Elior rose, still holding her hand, and the square erupted, not in laughter this time, but applause. Real applause. Warm, thunderous, alive. And beneath the glow of lanterns, Lila smiled, a true, unguarded smile as the man who saw her, truly saw her, kissed her hand in front of them all. Spring came to Harrow's Hollow like a slow sunrise, soft, warm, and full of change. The snow melted from the hills, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the people of the village found themselves speaking a little more gently, walking a little slower when they passed the small cottage on the edge of town. It was Lila's cottage now, the same old barn she had once hidden in. The rough boards had been mended, the broken windows replaced, and the place that once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and music. The woman who had once been the sack woman no longer hid her face. Her sack had long since been burned, its ashes scattered in the wind. In its place hung a white dress she had sewn herself, a symbol of everything she had reclaimed. The villagers who had once mocked her now greeted her with cautious kindness. They brought bread, flowers, and small gifts, not out of pity but apology. Some still whispered behind their hands, unable to forget who she had been, but even they spoke softer now, for they all remembered that night in the square, when the ugly duckling they'd scorned became something far greater than beauty, bravery, and now, On a bright morning under a sky clear as glass, Lila stood before a mirror, heart racing. Today, she was to be married. Down in the square, the whole village gathered. Lanterns were hung between trees, ribbons fluttered in the breeze, and tables overflowed with bread and berries and honeyed wine. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a celebration of something deeper, something the Hollow hadn't seen in years. Forgiveness. Elior stood waiting beneath the old oak tree at the center of the square, dressed in simple linen and holding his violin. His smile was quiet but full, his eyes glimmering with that same warmth that had once pierced the darkness of her barn. When Lila appeared at the edge of the square, a hush swept through the crowd. She wore a gown of soft white linen, stitched with wildflowers and tied with a ribbon the color of morning sunlight. Her hair was loose, brushed by the breeze. Her steps were unsure at first, but when her eyes met Elior's, she forgot the crowd entirely. He took her hands, and without a priest or formal vows, they promised each other something truer, to see one another fully, to forgive the world that hadn't, to make music out of silence. The crowd cheered, and Elior lifted his violin. "This," he said softly, "is our first song as husband and wife." The bow touched the strings, and the melody that rose was one the villagers would never forget. It wasn't perfect. Some notes quivered, some broke, but it was alive, glowing with love. And as he played, Lila danced. She moved with ease and freedom now, her body no longer heavy with fear. Every step was light, every turn filled with joy. Children clapped, women wept, and even the old men who had once mocked her nodded silently in respect. There was no sack, no shame, only a woman who had learned that beauty was not in perfection, but in the courage to be seen. When the song ended, Elior set down his violin and pulled her into his arms. The crowd erupted in cheers. Mira, standing near the back, wiped her eyes quietly. She had come expecting to scoff, but found herself smiling instead. Somewhere deep inside, a lesson took root, a quiet understanding that cruelty once spoken cannot always be taken back. But kindness can still begin anew. As the sun dipped low, painting the square in gold, Lila and Elior danced one last time, beneath the oak tree, and those who watched swore the light seemed to follow her, that the woman once hidden beneath burlap now shone brighter than the lanterns themselves, for she had become the very thing the world said she could never be, seen, loved, and free.